What's going on, everyone? James Lynch here, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, I'm going to be looking at the middleweight fight slated for UFC 285, Derek Brunson against Dricus Du Plessis. But before I give you my preview and pick, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Those things really do help out the channel a lot, and it would be awesome if you could just do that. Okay, let's get into this fight. Taking place, like I said, UFC 285. Pair of teammates. These guys have actually trained together at Killcliff, a.k.a. Hard Knocks, a.k.a. Sanford, whatever you want to call that gym these days out in Florida. But yeah, really interesting fight. Very pivotal fight in the middleweight division for both guys. Just sort of kind of on the surface of this, you've got Dricus Du Plessis, who is rising up very quickly in the division, has looked great in his last couple fights, and Derek Brunson, getting up there. There was talk about retirement, and it seems like he is continuing to fight in his career. So yeah, really good crossroad fights for both guys at UFC 285. Okay, let's get into a quick tail of the tape before we get into the rest of the card here. So you can see there, Brunson 23-8, Dricus 18-2, 39 years old, 29 years old. 6'1" apiece, 77-inch reach to 76. So on paper, other than the age, they're pretty similar in terms of just the amount of height and reach and all that, and then also even their records. There's not like a huge difference in terms of the records and all that, although we will talk about some differences there in a second. But yeah, there's your quick tail of the tape on the surface there. This is just a main card fight. It's only 3 rounds, and this is going to be taking place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas for UFC 285 as part of that pay-per-view. So it will be a bigger cage, which is great. Let's start first with Derek Brunson, the Strikeforce veteran. 23-8, like I mentioned there, 39 years old. So he just turned 39 back on January 4th. So yeah, they're exactly 10 years apart because believe it or not, Dricus Du Plessis' birthday is also this month as well. I mentioned that they're 6'1" with a 77-inch reach, 23-8. So the only advantage that Brunson's going to have in this fight from a physical standpoint is that he's got a 1-inch reach advantage. That's it. I mentioned that there he trains at Killcliff. He's an NCAA Division II wrestler, and he's got a BJJ black belt under Renzo Gracie. So, and we know the knockout power as well, too. He's looked great. Derek Brunson's got fight of the night 2 times against Yoel Romero and Robert Whitaker. He's got performance of the night 1 time against Lyoto Machida. He's got the second most wins in UFC middleweight history at 14. He's tied with Anderson Silva and Brad Tavares. He also tied Nate Marquardt and Chris Liebman for the most finishes in UFC middleweight division history at 9. So this is a guy that has been in the UFC for a while. That's why you see him, having these accolades next to, names like Anderson Silva, right? So Brunson is the definition of a veteran. Very, very good fighter. Let's go look at his MMA debut, which was way back in, his amateur debut, I should say, was way back in January of 2010. So we're coming up to the 23-year anniversary, if my math's correct there. 13 years. Never mind. My math's going a little whack here. 13-year anniversary of Derek Brunson actually fighting for the first time, which is kind of interesting there. Made his professional debut shortly after that in May of 2010. Didn't make his UFC debut until December 2012, and what ended up being a really awful fight with Chris Liebman. If you guys remember that fight, that wasn't very good. And came over to us from Strikeforce. He was actually part of the Strikeforce Challenger series as well, which was kind of like the Contender series back in the day, if you think about it. Really good series that they used to do there on Showtime. Derek Brunson has a 14-6 record. He's got 9 finishes. Very impressive. He's only got a couple notable wins though. You look at some of the names that he's fought. Yeah, these are nice finishes here. But in terms of like ranked opponents that, were heading towards a title shot or anything along those lines, Lyoto Machida was a good win. I know Machida was sort of on the tail end of his career at that point as well, but Machida's a former champion. That counts for sure. And then Darren Till, that was a very good fight. That was his second last fight, and that was the fight that, kind of reminded people, okay, Derek Brunson's still a contender. Very good win there in the 3rd round over Derek Brunson getting it done over Darren Till in that fight. And his losses, it's the who's who pretty much for the most part. We can even go back to Strikeforce and look when he got knocked out by Jacare Souza. But his first UFC loss was against Yoel Romero, one of the best middleweights in the UFC of all time. Robert Whitaker, Anderson Silva, Jacare Souza again, and then Israel Adesanya. And then he most recently lost to Jared Cannonier in his last fight, but you see what Cannonier's been able to do throughout his career at middleweight. That's not a bad loss to have. And actually, if you remember that fight, Brunson was having some success in that first round. It was Cannonier being able to, again, use his power and take care of business to get the TKO win in the second round there. So again, really good resume there for Derek Brunson. Now, one thing with Brunson, while he has been in the UFC for a while, he's actually had a lot of injuries. I went back and looked at this. So if you go all the way back to which opponent was it that I was looking at? So if you look at the fact that he's supposed to fight Yoel Romero back in 2013 here, this was part of the UFC 264 card. He had an injury there. Then he had another injury against Krzysztof Jotko. They never ended up fighting. There was a rib injury there. Supposed to fight Gegard Mousasi. Remember that at UFC 200? Thiago Santos ended up replacing him, and Mousasi finished Santos. But yeah, he had an injury in that fight as well. It was supposed to take place in July of 2016. Supposed to fight Antonio Carlos Jr. back in 2018, but had an eye injury. And then he was supposed to fight Edmund Shabazz. No, it was Jack Hermanson, actually. I think people forget about that. He was actually supposed to fight Jack in December of this year, last year. Didn't end up happening because of an injury there too. So a lot of injuries. That's always a bit concerning when you're getting a fighter who's getting close to 40, which Brunson is. And like I mentioned off the top. And with those injuries, Brunson's also had a lot of layoffs. So going from Chris Liebman, his UFC debut, to Brian Houston, there was a 319-day layoff. Going from Jacare Souza, right here, to Israel Adesanya, there was a 280-day layoff. Going from Ian Heinisch to Edmund Shabazian, there was a 350-day layoff. And then going from Jared Cannonier to Dricus Du Plessis. Remember that Cannonier fight was in February of 2022, which is a very long time. There's going to be a 385-day layoff. So one thing we got to point out here with this matchup, Derek Brunson will be having the longest layoff in his UFC career heading into this fight. And a guy who's 39, that doesn't, usually bode very well. Unless it's Dominic Cruz fighting, Takeo Mizugaki, but typically that doesn't happen with fighters that have had that long of a layoff there. Now, I mentioned one of the losses there for Derek Brunson. That was against Anderson Silva. And if you remember, that was a bit of a robbery, or at least a fight that was highly contested. And I went back and looked at the media scorecards for that fight, and 4 media members scored the fight for Anderson Silva. 20 media members scored the fight for Derek Brunson. So again, Brunson probably should have been, 24-7 instead of 23-8, but what are you going to do? We've seen some bad decisions before. It's going to happen every now and then. So that's pretty much it on Derek Brunson. Another tidbit about him was that he was supposed to be on the Ultimate Fighter, but he ended up, there was some issue with his Strikeforce contract at the time when he was there, so he wasn't able to do that show. But you just wonder about him being on there, how that would have gone. But yeah, Derek Brunson, again, guy doesn't get enough credit. Very, very good fighter. And again, you just look at the losses he has, pretty star-studded cast as far as that goes. Okay, let's talk about Dricus Du Plessis. Someone I'm actually hoping to get an interview with before this fight. I probably will. You look at it there. It says 28 years old, but check this out. Dricus is actually turning 29 tomorrow at the time of recording this. We're recording this on January 13th. So yeah, he'll be 29. So there is exactly a 10-year age gap between the two of them. They're both born in January. There's a 10-year age gap. But that's about it. That's the only advantage that Dricus has on paper in this fight because he's 6'1", and then he's actually got a reach disadvantage against Brunson just by 1 inch. Dricus is a second-degree black belt in kickboxing. He's the former EFC middleweight and welterweight champion. Sort of what he's known for. He's got performance of the night one time against Trevin Giles, and then in his last fight against Darren Till, he actually got fight of the night honors in that one. So he's got 2 accolades so far in his young UFC career. Now, Dricus did not have an amateur debut. He went straight to the pros. That was back in July of 2013. By that time, Derek Brunson already had 12 professional fights. You go to his UFC debut, which took place in July of 2021. Sorry, October of 2020. My bad. October of 2020. Derek Brunson already had 17 UFC fights at that point. You got to remember, Brunson came in very early. He was part of the Strikeforce deal. So he's been in the UFC for a while, whereas Dricus hasn't. Although saying that, KSW, EFC, those are good promotions, overseas as well. Roberto Sodiq, I mentioned this in the last breakdown. Very, very, very good fighter. So he's got a win over him and a loss over him. So that's something to keep in mind. Dricus has a 4-0 UFC record, as you can see there. He's only got 2 notable wins. Brad Tavares, ranked opponent, and then obviously Darren Till in his last fight. That was a very good win. Actually, he almost finished Till in the first round. And then Till was able to survive. He slowed down a little bit, and then he was able to get the finish in the 3rd round. Very good win there for Dricus. But if he would have got that in the first round, I think, maybe he's propelled up even higher with getting that done. But it was certainly close. He absolutely destroyed Darren Till in that first round. It was a crazy performance there. And as you can see there, he has no notable losses. Dricus has only had 2 layoffs in his career. Going from Trevin Giles to Brad Tavares, there was a 357-day layoff. And then going from Marcus Perez to Trevin Giles, there was the 273-day layoff. But this will be a nice turnaround here. So he just fought in December. He's fighting in March. Any fighter would want that type of turnaround time. So really good for Dricus to sort of keep that momentum going. Dricus has not had any major injuries, unlike Brunson, right? Like he's a guy that has been fairly healthy, and that'll happen when you've only got 4 UFC fights. I mentioned this actually some of the fights that you've seen, some of the layoffs, I should say, that occurred with Dricus were actually just visa issues. He lives in South Africa. There's always some issues traveling, especially in this day and age with COVID and all that. So that's one of the reasons why we have not seen Dricus maybe as active as I think people would like. Dricus has fought in multiple weight classes. So he's fought, I believe, 15 times at middleweight. And this fight will be his 16th. He's fought 4 times at welterweight, and he's had a catchweight one time of 176. So maybe on the smaller side there. I mean, I don't believe Derek Brunson has fought at welterweight in his career, but just one little tidbit to sort of keep in mind. And the great thing about Dricus, because this guy is mainly finishing his fights other than Tavares, he hasn't had any controversial decisions. So, I mean, even the Tavares fight, I don't think anyone felt like Tavares won that. It was a pretty decisive win there for Dricus Du Plessis. Okay. Let's talk about this fight in terms of a pick. Like I said, former teammates, so there'll be some familiarity there. Brunson will be the one training at Killcliff. He lives. I don't think he lives there. I think he just does his camps there. But for Dricus, way too difficult to come over from South Africa and train there. I don't imagine they're going to do a situation where they both train there at the same time. Although I know right now at the time of recording this, Marvin Vettori is fighting Roman Dolidze. They're both training at Extreme Couture, which is interesting. But I don't think that'll happen. And Dricus didn't train at Killcliff for his last fight either. He was all training back home. So yeah, I'm sure the same thing is going to apply here as well. Now, we don't have odds on this fight yet. If I had to guess, I would say Dricus might be a slight favorite here, even though Brunson has fought the better opposition. He's got, more experience in terms of octagon time. I think because of his age, Dricus will be favored a little bit. So if I had to guess, I'd say Dricus might be like a minus 150 to minus 200 favorite, I think. Again, I've gotten odds wrong before, but that's just my initial guess, just because typically when you have a younger fighter who has a pretty good record like Dricus does, 18-2, you tend to go that way. So my pick. This is a tough one. Actually, when this was first announced, I was kind of leaning more towards Brunson. And, my reasoning is, this is a guy that I think is very underrated. You look at his losses, they're against some of the best fighters in that division. And he's got knockout power, right? And Dricus has been finished before. We could see that happen for sure. I mean, that's certainly something that I think Brunson is capable of. He's got really good wrestling. Like, can Dricus get a takedown? Can he do any of that he was able to do against Till? Most likely not. I mean, Darren Till, it was crazy in the Darren Till fight because, Darren Till's training with Hamzat and all these other guys, and he can't stop a takedown. It was crazy. So Dricus is not going to be able to do that in this fight. So this is where the fight stays standing. But the question is, who's better in the stand-up? I would say Brunson is, but you got to think that Dricus is, okay, I'd say I'd give a slight edge to Brunson. Brunson certainly has the power edge, I would say. Even though Dricus has knockout power himself, I think Brunson has a slight edge there. But who's going to be faster? I think I'm going to go with the 29-year-old as opposed to the 39-year-old, right? You would have to think Dricus is a little bit faster in this fight. So that's kind of where I see the fight going. I don't think we're going to see this fight hit the mat. Maybe Brunson does like a wrestling-heavy game plan because maybe he knows that his wrestling isn't good. Maybe that happens. And maybe Brunson sort of, puts himself in a situation where he's just pinning Dricus up against the fence and Dricus can't do anything. I could see that happening for sure. To me, this fight's going one of two ways. I see either Derek Brunson grinding out and winning a decision here, like we've seen him do so many times, like against Kevin Holland and so many other fighters that we've seen, or I think Dricus knocks him out. I do. The amount of knockouts that Brunson has had is a bit, it's glaring, right? Like it's something that you got to make note of. And typically when guys are getting older, at some point that chin's got to go. I don't know if it's there yet. Cannonier knocked him out. And granted, he's had more than a year off. I think the time off has been great for him. But you look at it there, Adesanya knocked him out in the first round. Souza knocked him out in the first round. Whitaker knocked him out in the first round. Again, these are fighters that are better than Dricus. However, that stuff adds up, right? And if you look at Dricus in terms of damage in his career, he's got one knockout loss in his entire career, which is much younger. And I mentioned sort of the difference there of Brunson having so many more fights than Dricus in terms of, like how long he's been in the sport. And you got to think on top of those fights, there's a lot of sparring sessions and training camp. There's all these other things. So as far as who's more like sort of taking more damage, it's absolutely Brunson. And I think that's going to be a key thing here in this fight. What I see happening is I think Brunson is going to try and wrestle in the first round. I think he's going to go that route because I think if I had to guess, I think that he feels like he is the better wrestler here and he's going to go and try and implement that game plan. But I think Dricus is going to figure it out. I think he's going to stuff a few takedowns and I think it's going to stay standing. And when it does, I think Dricus is going to clip Derek Brunson, and I think he's going to get a second round knockout. So I think if you're betting this fight, the safe bet here is Brunson decision, Dricus by knockout. Dricus might get a decision here. It's only 3 rounds. However, I think he can do what he almost did to Darren Till, which was finish him. And one thing I want to point out with Derek Brunson as well, because, people talk about, Brunson's only been knocked out once since the Izzy fight, right? And that's 2022 to 2018. Look at the guys he fought in between there. Theodoro, not a knockout artist. Rest in peace, by the way, Elias. Ian Heinisch does have some power, but not really. Edmund Shabazian has power, but Edmund Shabazian is the type of guy, and I know he's changed things around a bit, but I mean, his whole thing was if he doesn't take you out in the first round, he's going to gas out and lose, and that's exactly what happened in that fight. I remember going into that fight, Shabazian was, all the hype. He's coming off that knockout win over Brad Tavares. And actually, I'll walk back on something here quickly. Shabazian was a good win back then because I remember going into that fight, they were trying to fast track Shabazian to a title shot, and Brunson totally spoiled those plans. So that's another reason why I think Brunson's a little underrated here. But yes, that was a good stoppage win there. Kevin Holland has knockout power too, but not typically at middleweight. Like, we haven't seen him get like a ton of finishes, and if they are finishes, they're against guys that have been knocked out before as well. So, again, and he, and Brunson wasn't able to, knock Holland out either. Darren Till was a submission win, and it was in the 3rd round. So kind of similar opponent there. And that fight was only in 2021. It wasn't that long ago. So kind of what I'm getting at here is that you look at the guys that Brunson has beat. A lot of these guys don't have the type of power I think that Dricus has. So that's why I think Dricus can go and get the win here, similar to what Jared Cannonier did in their fight as well. So yeah, my pick's going to be Dricus, 2nd round knockout. Again, I'm kind of taking a little leap of faith here and hoping that Dricus from fight to fight improves. I thought the Till win was good. It wasn't great. He definitely slowed down a bit. That's something he's got to be careful of. He doesn't want to pull a Edmund Shabazian in this fight against Brunson and gas out and get finished in the 3rd round like Shabazian did. But I still think Dricus, because he's 10 years younger, still got good knockout power. He keeps it standing. I think he can knock him out. So my official pick is going to be Dricus Du Plessis by knockout to get it done. And then we're going to start talking about Dricus maybe fighting for a title next year. I think we're getting to that point. If he finishes Brunson, I think he needs one more after that. And then we'll start talking about title talks, which if you look at the rankings, because Brunson is, I mentioned it there, Brunson is ranked he's ranked number 5. So you get that, you're already in the top 5. And Dricus, of course, ranked number 10 right now. So there we go. All right, so I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking in this fight? Again, very, very, very close fight. Like I said, I could see Brunson winning a decision here, but if I have to pick, which I am, this is the point of the show, I am going to go Dricus by knockout to get it done. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. While you're there, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button as well. Hit that notification bell. And if there's any other fights you guys want me to preview, I'm going to be doing more of these shows this year. That was one of the things I told you guys in the poll that I'm going to try and do is do more previews for fun fights. Like even this one. This isn't a headliner, but I think it's a very interesting matchup in the middleweight division. So if you have any other suggestions, would love to hear them. And if you disagree with me on this fight, I'd love to hear why. Let's be civil. Let's have a great conversation about this. That's kind of the stuff I'm trying to promote on here. So again, I'm James Lynch. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.